Hello there and welcome to the first day of the 12 Days of Squatchmas, where I will release a video every day from now until Christmas Eve. So go on, grab your favorite snackage and come settle in with the soft glow of the Christmas tree and cozy up to the warmth of the fireplace for tonight's encounter. Are you ready? Me too. Let's do this. Hey Nance, I sent an experience into you before which you posted in 2021. That experience was from when I was a child living in Ohio. I am sending you what you could call a twofer. My first story. In my previous experience that I emailed you, I made mention of wondering out loud about hearing trees falling while camping in the Boundary Waters in northern Minnesota, even though it was a windy evening. However, thinking back, there were quite a lot of trees breaking during the evening before I fell asleep. My memory has made me wonder enough to track down my old camping friend who had been with me on that trip. Let's call my friend Jay. Jay remembered our camping and canoeing trip in the Boundary Waters. After asking about our last night in the waters, Jay paused for several moments before saying, "Oh yeah, I remember that night." This is what we both remember. The weather during our trip was terrible. This was 1988, so there's no phones, GPS, etc. We just dealt with whatever weather came at us when we were canoeing, camping, or out hiking. Even though we were prepared for rain, the rain and wind were taking a toll on us physically, since we had paddled for several days far from our put-in spot. After 4 days of hellish weather, we decided to leave early, especially since we had a run-in with a bear at a very creepy campsite where we took a break, and also a moose running through our camp, which just about sent me into the lake trying to get out of the way. Well, the moose story? That's for another time. It's funny now, but at the time, wow, those animals are huge. The last day we were there, we must have paddled about 15 miles into the wind. No rain, lots of sunshine, but it was windy. Wind that was getting worse as the day went on. We found an empty island to camp for the night. We were both exhausted, fighting wind and waves in the canoe all day. In this part of the Boundary Waters, at that time, no motorized boats were permitted. Imagine our surprise when we saw a guy coming up to the island in a john boat with a motor. We were not happy to see him, to say the least. Neither of us remember what we talked about, except that we lied about how many of us were there camping, just in case. We ate dinner and went into the tent while the sun was still up. We were so tired that we couldn't stay awake. Before we got into the tent, we had a conversation about the guy in the boat. We definitely were keeping our weapons close at hand because neither one of us was comfortable with his visit. The next day, Jay woke me up early. I slept like a log all night because I truly was exhausted from canoeing for almost a week. I got dressed in the tent, and when I came out, I saw that Jay had packed up everything into the canoe and was ready to leave. When I mentioned how Jay was ready to go, Jay said that we needed to get going right away in case the wind began swirling hard again. I don't remember if I even ate breakfast, but off we went after tearing down the tent. I have no memory whatsoever of the following account regarding the previous night's events. It is completely Jay's story of our last night. At some point, Jay said, I woke up to walking outside our tent. Who, or what it was walking on 2 feet, not 4. I know the difference. It was completely dark, no moon. Maybe it was cloudy. I was confused how the heck that guy from the boat could walk around our tent in pitch black of night with no light. I then heard heavy, deep-sounding breathing. So then I began to think, I must be wrong. This must be a bear. It must have heard you move in your sleeping bag because it ran off. That is when I realized, that's not a bear. It really is on 2 feet. I just kept thinking, how is that guy moving so easily in the dark? I mean, it was 1988. Night vision was not a thing that most people personally owned and used. I tried to wake you up, but you were not waking up. Or maybe I didn't try very hard. I didn't hear anything for a long time. I just laid there listening. The wind had calmed down, so I remember how quiet it seemed. Then the walking started again, and it growled. That growl was not a bear. I spent a lot of time camping in Australia, and I have heard saltwater crocs growl. That growl was like a croc and a bear mixed together, though much scarier and deeper than either one of them on its own. I was really trying to wake you up, but you would not wake up. I just curled up in my sleeping bag and prayed whatever it was would go away. This is when I almost peed myself. It began touching the tent on my side. I moved closer to you, and you mumbled something. But whatever it was, it ran off again. Then it came back at least one more time, growling again and poking at the tent. I tried waking you up again. This time you yelled at me to stop. I honestly think you yelled at me because you sounded as though you just went back to sleep. Whatever it was, it ran off again. At some point I fell asleep or maybe passed out from fear. I was awake as soon as there was light. I didn't hear anything outside the tent, so I cautiously went out. I didn't see anything. I didn't look for footprints or anything because all I could think about was getting out of there. I packed everything I could immediately because I just felt like I was being watched. Then I woke you up, finally. Jay then went on to say, about 10 years later while living in Michigan, they heard that growl again while at a friend's place close to Oscoda. Jay was shocked when the friend casually said, "Oh, that's the Bigfoot who lives on the property. Let's go inside." And that is all Jay had to say about that. My second story. I have been living in California since 1997. The experience I'm about to tell you is not a sighting or hearing screams as I did when I was a child. However, the event had me almost breaking ankles to get down off a mountain. In May 2014, my spouse and I were vacationing in the Tahoe area. I remember the month because I was in between semesters as I was attending grad school at the time. I will not say specifically where we were, except that we were in the Sierra Mountains at around 6,000 feet in the northwest area of Lake Tahoe. There was a trailhead behind the residences where we were staying. It was about a 3-mile climb up and down to reach the end of the trail on the other side of the mountain. It looked to be a difficult trail with it going up the mountain to about 8,000 feet or higher. My spouse is not as physically fit as I am and was worried about going the entire distance of the trail. When we went hiking up the trail, we decided to hike as far as was comfortable for my spouse. After about a half-mile, we came across a magnificent area of giant boulders where the spring runoff was flowing down the side of the mountain. The Tahoe region is made of granite boulders and rocky summits, so coming across a jagged area of boulders is not uncommon. We decided to have our lunch sitting on these wonderful giant rocks and to hang out in this general area. It was beautiful and relaxing. I had brought my binoculars with me, so I was able to survey, or at least try to survey, the remaining trail up the mountain. As much as I tried to convince my spouse that I thought we could go further, my argument failed. We hiked back down to our residence instead. The next day, I really wanted to hike further up the mountain. My spouse did not want to join me, opting to hang out by the pool. I decided to go alone. It was a beautiful day, and I knew that it was going to be a spectacular view once I reached the top of the trail. If you have traveled up the mountains around Lake Tahoe, you know exactly what I mean when I say it was going to be a spectacular view. After going about a mile further from where we had been the day before, I glassed the area to make sure I was still on the trail. There was not much in terms of signage for the trail, except for color ribbons tied to trees or a makeshift arrow pointing recklessly forward. I decided to use a ridge that seemed to be about 1,500 feet ahead of me as a marker. I was correct in using the ridge as it got me to a wider, rock-laden part of the trail. The trail may have been a fire road. Either way, I was relieved to see legible signs referring to the trail. I was even more relieved to walk on some flat land because my thighs were burning from the climb. I began walking on the wider part of the trail paralleling the ridge which was to my right in a northwestern direction. The ridge was about 100 feet tall. I eventually stepped into an open area. I wouldn't call it a meadow because the ground was mostly rock. The open area was about 500 yards wide and 200 yards across, leading back into the tree line. I was halfway across this open area when all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I immediately stopped and scanned my surroundings. It was at this moment that I also got what I referred to as the "oh crap" feeling. My "oh crap" feeling has saved my life several times. Call it a sixth sense, instinct, intuition, or whatever you want to call it. I know better than to ignore the feeling when it emerges. Since it was spring, my first thought was bear. I did not want to be near a mama bear and her cubs. It wouldn't be my first time coming across a bear in the woods, but no cubs. Please, no cubs. I also thought about mountain lions, though I was unsure if they lived this high in elevation in this area. Either way, I immediately put my head on a swivel, looking and listening for movement with my hand on my bear spray. It was eerily quiet. I heard and saw nothing. After a few moments of silence around me, my "oh crap" feeling was telling me to get out of there. I turned and began to walk back. I kept my head on a swivel because my senses were in overdrive. As I entered back into the area with more trees, the ridgeline was now on my left. It is here when I heard something walking, and it seemed to be coming from the ridgeline. I stopped and searched again for a bear. The bears I've seen in the Tahoe area always have been huge, around 300 to 400 pounds. Too much human food is available for them, I guess. I keep looking for a large bear or cubs running around near the ridge or climbing the nearby trees. But nothing. Whatever this is, I decided it wasn't a mountain lion either because I would never have heard that animal if it was stalking me. I began to walk again, and so did the walking on the ridgeline. It's at this moment it occurred to me, bears just don't stop walking unless they're poking around for food. And at this time of year, after hibernating, bears do a lot of poking around for food. I did not want to be around for any of that, certainly not at close range. I started to walk faster. Whatever was on the ridgeline kept up with me. I tried not to stare at the ridgeline because I needed to watch where I was going with all the rocks, small sticks, and forest debris on the path. After reaching the end of the wider, cleared-out rock aspect of the trail, I began a slight jog down the mountain, trying to be as careful as possible to not fall or twist an ankle. I still had a good 3/4 of a mile or more to go off this trail and back to the residence's parking lot. I am now scared because I could hear whatever it was following me. It was crashing through the woods on my left side. Whoever it is, it's not trying to hide their footsteps. Even more scary is I couldn't really see it, no matter how many times I glanced over or briefly stopped to look. Was I seeing it? Was there a shape running between the trees? Am I freaking out for no reason? These questions were in my head as I tried not to tumble down the mountain. When it sounded as though it was coming closer, I began double-timing it down that mountain. Eventually, I got to the area where the boulders with the spring water runoff was located. Much to my relief, there were people walking around the boulders. They all gave me a look of dismay as I came tearing around a boulder, startling them. I stopped to catch my breath and said, "I think there's a bear further up the trail." I pointed in the direction where the sound was coming from and up towards the ridge line. All they said was they were not going up that far. They didn't seem too concerned. I no longer heard the crashing in the woods. I stared off into the woods behind me for several minutes, searching for something, anything. After seeing nothing, I continued back down the mountain. I heard nothing more as I made my way further down along the trail. I'm not sure if it continued to flank me or not because the water running on the rocks was loud enough to drown out most other sound, especially when you were right next to it. Once I reached the trailhead at the parking lot, I stopped to glass the area. Nothing. All I could hear was me panting and my heart pulsing in my ears. I don't really know what was in the woods that day because I didn't really see it. Well, I saw something, but I can't really say what. I do know it wasn't a bear because it would have caught me easily if it wanted to. A mountain lion would have had no issues catching up to me either, and I would not have heard it coming. I would not have seen a mountain lion coming until too late, if I saw it at all. I'll say this much. I do know that when my oh crap feeling starts, I am to listen and to get out. Signed, Mary. All right, well, thank you to Mary for that email, and thank you to all of you for helping me kick off this year's Squatchmas. Now, don't worry, we'll be meeting right back here tomorrow, right around the tree, same time, same YouTube channel. Until then, always remember, absence of proof is not proof of absence. And go ahead, have visions of sugar plums dancing in your head.